The bridge of the Eternal Dominion hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Zephyr reviewed the morning reports. His flagship stretched for miles through space, its crystalline hull gleaming with the soft blue glow of contained energy. Around him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with practiced precision, monitoring the vast expanse of the Kepler system. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Empire had ruled unopposed. 400 species had fallen before their might, each one absorbed into the great machine of imperial civilization. The formula never changed. Arrive, demonstrate superior firepower, accept surrender, integrate the new subjects into the empires. Structure. It worked every time because it had to work. Sub-Admiral Krex approached the command throne where Zephyr sat contemplating the star charts. His reptilian features showed the calm confidence that came from never knowing defeat. Admiral, our patrol ships report an anomaly in Sector 7. A single vessel of unknown design has dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Zephyr's interest peaked slightly. Unknown designs were rare these days. Most species followed predictable technological paths, building ships that resembled the vessels of races that came before them. "Show me," he commanded. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying the grainy image captured by their long-range sensors. What appeared before them defied every convention of starship design they knew. The vessel looked like someone had taken scrap metal and welded it together with desperate determination. Its hull showed a patchwork of different materials, some metallic, others ceramic, all bound together in a configuration that seemed to ignore basic principles of aerodynamics and energy flow. "Are we certain this is a starship?" Krex asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It appears to be debris held together by hope and primitive bonding agents." Aboard the human vessel UE's Defiant, Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the same scene from a very different perspective. Where the Empire saw primitive construction, he saw robust engineering. Where they saw chaos, he saw redundancy. The Defiant had been built in Earth's orbital shipyards, using the best technology humanity could muster. But compared to what his sensors were showing him about the alien vessels, it might as well have been made from tin cans and string. "Captain, we're detecting multiple contacts approaching our position," reported Commander Lisa Rodriguez from the tactical station. Her fingers danced across controls that were mechanical switches and physical displays, rather than the holographic. "Interfaces the Empire favored. They're big, Morrison." "Really big," Morrison nodded grimly. When humanity had first detected signs of advanced civilization in the Kepler system, the decision to investigate had been controversial. Earth's resources were limited, and building the Defiant had required international cooperation on a scale never before achieved. Now, looking at the massive alien ships surrounding them, Morrison wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. "Lieutenant." Commander Steve Parker's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, these readings can't be right. Those ships are putting out more energy than some of our smaller stars. How is that even possible?" "I don't know, Steve, but let's assume they're not here to welcome us to the neighborhood," Morrison replied. He turned to his communications. "Officer Bobby, try to establish contact. Use the universal mathematics protocol we developed." Lieutenant Bobby Chon began transmitting a series of mathematical sequences, starting with prime numbers and building toward more complex concepts. It was humanity's best guess at how to communicate with an unknown intelligence based on the assumption that mathematics would be universal. On the Imperial flagship, the alien transmissions puzzled the communication specialists. The signals were crude, using radio waves instead of quantum entanglement or subspace resonance. More disturbing was their content. The mathematical sequences were correct, but presented in a way that suggested the senders had discovered these concepts independently. "This is impossible," muttered Chief Communications Officer Vex as he analyzed the data. These beings appear to have developed space travel without contact with any known civilization. The probability calculations show this shouldn't happen. Admiral. Zephyr studied the tactical display with growing unease. Independent technological development was a theoretical possibility, but in practice, it simply didn't occur. Every species the Empire had encountered had built upon the foundations laid by their predecessors, following established patterns of advancement. This human vessel represented something unprecedented, a completely alien approach to engineering and design. "Hail them," Zephyr commanded. "Let's see what these creatures have to say for themselves." The communication link established after several minutes of technical difficulties. The human ship's transmission systems were so primitive that Imperial technology struggled to interface with them. When the connection finally stabilized, Captain Morrison's image appeared on the main screen. Zephyr was surprised to see that the aliens looked remarkably similar to several humanoid species already within the Empire. 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry, and features that suggested they had evolved from predator stock. What struck him most was their eyes. Where most conquered species showed fear or resignation when first confronted by Imperial might, these humans displayed something else entirely. Curiosity mixed with stubborn determination. "I am Admiral Zephyr of the Galactic Empire," he began, using the standard first contact protocol. "You have entered Imperial space without authorization. State your intentions and purpose." Morrison straightened in his command chair, fully aware that his next words might determine the fate of his crew and possibly his entire species. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Defiant. We're an exploration vessel from the planet Earth, investigating this system as part of our first deep space mission. We had no knowledge of your Empire's presence here." The admission of ignorance should have been reassuring to Zephyr, but instead it deepened his concern. Species that achieved interstellar travel typically announced their presence to the galaxy through long-range communications or by following established hyperspace routes. These humans had simply appeared, apparently having developed their own faster-than-light technology without any outside influence. "Your vessel's design suggests a primitive technological base," Sub-Admiral Krex interjected. "How did you achieve faster-than-light travel with such limited resources?" Morrison glanced at Commander Rodriguez, who shrugged slightly. There was no point in hiding their capabilities now. "We developed what we call a fusion torch drive, combined with a spatial compression field generator. It's not elegant, but it gets the job done." The Imperial bridge fell silent. Spatial compression was an advanced theoretical concept that most species never mastered. The fact that these apparent primitives had not only understood it, but built a working device, challenged everything the Empire thought they knew about technological progression. Dr. Helen Wright, the Defiant science officer, whispered urgently to Morrison, "Captain, their ships are showing energy signatures that don't match any known physics. They're either using technology so advanced we can't comprehend it, or they've found completely different solutions to the same problems." Zephyr made his decision, falling back on 3 millennia of successful precedent. "Captain Morrison, your species has achieved a noteworthy milestone by developing interstellar travel. However, this system and all systems within a radius of 50 light years are under Imperial jurisdiction. You will surrender your vessel and submit to Imperial authority for processing and integration into our civilization." The words hung in space between the 2 ships like a challenge. Morrison felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Everything humanity had worked for, everything they had dreamed of achieving among the stars, suddenly balanced on his response to this ultimatum. "With respect, Admiral," Morrison replied carefully, "we decline your generous offer. Earth is a sovereign world, and the Defiant operates under its authority. We're not looking for trouble, but we're also not looking to become anyone's subjects. For the first time in centuries, an imperial demand had been refused. The shocked silence on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion stretched for long seconds as the implications sank in. Admiral Zephyr's voice carried the weight of absolute authority when he finally spoke. You have one standard imperial cycle to reconsider. Your position, Captain Morrison. After that time expires, we will be forced to demonstrate why the Empire has remained unchallenged for 3,000 years. The standard imperial cycle passed slowly aboard both vessels. Admiral Zephyr spent the time reviewing tactical reports and preparing for what he assumed would be a brief demonstration of imperial superiority. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever required more than a single battle group to convince them of the futility of resistance. Sub-Admiral Krex stood beside the tactical display, studying the primitive human vessel with growing irritation. Admiral, their ship appears to be actively modifying itself. Our sensors detect welding operations, structural reinforcements, and what appears to be weapons installation. Zephyr nodded absently. Many species attempted last-minute preparations. When faced with imperial might, it never made a significant difference. Very well. Deploy Battle Group 7 to eliminate the human threat. Make it clean and efficient. On the bridge of the Defiant, Captain Morrison watched as 6 massive Imperial warships broke formation from the main fleet and began their approach. Each vessel dwarfed his ship by a factor of 10, their hulls glowing with barely contained energy. The sight should have been terrifying, but Morrison found himself studying their design with professional interest. Those ships are beautiful, Commander Rodriguez observed from her station. They look like they were grown rather than built. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker's voice echoed from the engineering deck below. Beautiful, maybe, but impractical. Look at those energy signatures. They're running everything at maximum efficiency with no redundancy. One system failure could cascade through their entire network. Morrison smiled grimly. Parker had spent the last day crawling through every maintenance tunnel and service corridor on the Defiant, personally checking backup systems and manual overrides. The human ship might look crude compared to Imperial vessels, but every critical system had at least 3 different ways to keep working. Dr. Helen Wright looked up from her science station with a worried expression. Captain, I've been analyzing their approach vector and energy patterns. They're not trying to disable us. Those weapon signatures suggest they intend to destroy us completely. The reality of their situation hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. This wasn't a negotiation or a show of force. The Empire intended to eliminate them as a warning to any other species that might consider resistance. Major Amy Collins checked her sidearm and the tactical vest she wore over her uniform. As head of the Defiant security team, she had trained for boarding actions and hostile encounters, but nothing in the manual covered fighting an enemy with technology centuries ahead of Earth's capabilities. All hands, this is the captain, Morrison announced over the ship's intercom. We are about to engage hostile forces that significantly outgun us. Our job is simple. Survive long enough to get home and warn Earth what's coming. Every system on this ship was built to take damage and keep working. Let's prove that human engineering is tougher than it looks. The Imperial attack began with textbook precision. The 6 warships arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the human vessel and opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams that could level mountains struck the Defiant's hull with devastating force. On the Imperial flagship, Sub-Admiral Krex watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Direct hits on all vectors. The primitive vessel should be reduced to component atoms by now. But when the energy dissipated, the human ship was still there, scarred and blackened, with chunks of hull armor drifting away into space, but still intact and still moving. Lieutenant Bobby Chun's voice crackled over the Defiant's damaged communications system. "Captain, we've lost primary communications, but backup systems are holding." That armor absorption technique Dr. Wright developed actually worked. The human ship's defense strategy had been born from necessity rather than advanced technology. Unable to generate energy shields like the Empire used, Wright had designed a hull composition that absorbed and dispersed energy attacks through multiple layers of different materials. The outer layer vaporized on impact, the middle layer conducted heat away from critical areas, and the inner layer maintained structural integrity. Parker's voice echoed from deep within the ship, where he was manually rerouting power systems. "We've lost main engines, but fusion backup is online. Life support is stable, and weapons are still functional." The Imperial battle group prepared for a second volley, confident that their initial attack had crippled the primitive vessel. Sub-Admiral Krex was already composing his victory report when the human ship did something unexpected. It fired back. The Defiant's weapons were crude by Imperial standards. Instead of sophisticated energy beams, they launched chunks of metal at tremendous velocity using electromagnetic acceleration. The projectiles were simple, stupid, and devastatingly effective. The first railgun slug punched through the lead, Imperial ship's energy shield, as if it didn't exist. The shield had been designed to deflect energy attacks, not physical projectiles moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The metal slug tore through the elegant hull plating and exploded inside the ship's power distribution center. Alarms screamed throughout the Imperial vessel as cascading failures rippled through its perfectly integrated systems. The ship's commander watched in horror as his beautiful, efficient vessel began tearing itself apart from the inside. Major Collins had positioned her security teams at key choke points throughout the Defiant, expecting Imperial boarding parties to materialize at any moment. Imperial technology allowed their troops to teleport directly onto enemy vessels, bypassing conventional defenses. The first Imperial soldiers appeared in the Defiant's cargo bay, their energy weapons ready to eliminate any resistance they encountered. What they found instead was a maze of storage containers, maintenance equipment, and blast doors that had no apparent logic to their placement. Collins and her team opened fire from concealed positions, using weapons that the Empire considered antiques. Bullets and explosive rounds punched through Imperial armor that had been designed to resist energy weapons. The boarding party found themselves trapped in unfamiliar terrain, fighting an enemy that refused to follow established tactical doctrine. Commander Rodriguez coordinated the ship's defense from her damaged tactical station. "Captain, we've got Imperial troops in sections 4 through 7, but they seem lost. Our ship's layout is confusing them." The Defiant had been designed by humans for humans, with a focus on practicality rather than elegance. Corridors branched and reconnected in patterns that made sense to crew members who needed to reach any system quickly, but appeared random to outsiders. Emergency bulkheads could seal off damaged sections, creating isolated pockets where boarding parties could be contained and eliminated. Dr. Wright monitored the battle from her science station, analyzing Imperial tactics and technology with growing understanding. "Captain, they're fighting like they've never faced serious resistance before. Their weapons are optimized for overwhelming firepower against unshielded targets. They don't seem to know how to adapt when their standard approach fails." The second Imperial boarding wave materialized in the Defiant's engineering section, where they expected to find the ship's heart and disable it quickly. Instead, they found Lieutenant Commander Parker and his engineering team waiting for them. With tools that doubled as weapons and an intimate knowledge of every pipe, conduit, and access panel in their domain, Parker used the ship's own systems as weapons, venting superheated plasma through maintenance shafts and using magnetic fields to disrupt Imperial equipment. His team fought with the desperate creativity of people defending their home, turning every piece of machinery into a potential threat. The Imperial Battle Group commander watched his perfect attack plan crumble as the primitive human vessel continued to fight with suicidal determination. 2 of his ships were now crippled. His boarding parties were trapped in hostile territory, and the enemy showed no signs of surrender. Sub-Admiral Krex stared at the tactical display in disbelief. How are they still fighting? Our weapons should have destroyed them completely. Admiral Zephyr watched the battle unfold with growing unease. In 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, no enemy had ever lasted more than minutes against a full battle group. This single human vessel had been fighting for over an hour and showed no signs of giving up. The Defiant's hull was a patchwork of damage and emergency repairs. Her crew was running on emergency power and backup life support, but she was still shooting back. Every time the Imperial ships thought they had delivered a killing blow, the human vessel found a way to keep fighting. Morrison stood on his damaged bridge, surrounded by sparking consoles and emergency lighting, watching his crew perform miracles with damaged equipment and sheer determination. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and fighting with technology that looked primitive compared to their enemies, but they were still here. "All stations report," he called out. "Weapons still firing," Rodriguez replied. "Engineering holding together." "With spare parts and stubbornness," Parker added. "Security has contained the boarding parties," Collins confirmed. "Science station analyzing everything they throw at us," Wright concluded. Morrison smiled despite their desperate situation. The Empire had expected to face another conquered species, but instead they had encountered something they had never seen before: humans who ref. Admiral Zephyr stood motionless on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical display with something approaching disbelief. Battle Group 7 was supposed to have eliminated the human threat within minutes. Instead, 2 Imperial ships were drifting powerless, their crews struggling with damage control, while the primitive human vessel continued to fight with stubborn determination. That Sub-Admiral Krex approached the command throne with visible agitation. "Admiral, this situation is becoming unacceptable. A single primitive vessel has held off our forces for over 2 hours. If word of this spreads throughout the Empire, it could encourage rebellion among our subject species." The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, Imperial authority had rested on the absolute certainty of military supremacy. The idea that any species could resist Imperial might was not just unthinkable, it was dangerous to the very foundation of their civilization. "Deploy the full battle squadron," Zephyr commanded, his voice carrying the weight of desperation disguised as authority. 40 ships should be sufficient to end this embarrassment. On the bridge of the Defiant, Captain Morrison watched as dozens of new contacts appeared on their damaged sensors. The reinforcements were massive, each one capable of destroying his ship single-handedly. The mathematics of the situation were simple and brutal. They were about to face impossible odds with a crippled vessel and a tired crew. Commander Rodriguez looked up from her tactical station, her face grim but determined. "Captain, I'm reading 43 new contacts, all capital ship class. They're forming a perfect sphere around us with overlapping fields of fire." Dr. Helen Wright had spent the lull between attacks studying the wreckage of the Imperial boarding parties and analyzing captured Imperial technology. Her findings were both encouraging and terrifying. "Captain, I need to brief you on what I've discovered about their technology." Morrison gathered his senior staff around Wright's science station, where she had assembled pieces of Imperial equipment and weapons. Her analysis painted a picture of a civilization that had achieved technological perfection at the cost of adaptability. "Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's also incredibly specialized," Wright explained. "Every system is designed to work in perfect harmony with every other system. It's elegant, efficient, and completely dependent on everything working exactly as designed." Lieutenant Commander Parker nodded in understanding. Single points of failure. If one critical system goes down, everything else starts falling apart. Wright smiled grimly. Exactly. Their ships are marvels of engineering, but they're also fragile in ways they don't seem to understand. Our railgun slugs didn't just damage their hulls. They disrupted power distribution networks that weren't designed to handle physical trauma. Major. Collins had been listening while monitoring the security situation throughout the ship. What about their soldiers? We've got about 30 of them contained in various sections, and they seem completely lost. Their training appears to be based on overwhelming firepower and rapid victory, Wright replied. They've never had to fight a prolonged battle against an enemy that refuses to surrender. More importantly, their equipment is designed for specific environmental conditions. When we started venting atmosphere and changing pressure levels, their suits couldn't adapt. Morrison studied the data with growing hope. The Empire's technological superiority was real, but it came with weaknesses that could be exploited. The question was whether they could exploit those weaknesses long enough to survive the coming assault. Rodriguez, what's our weapons status? Morrison asked. We've got 6 railgun turrets still operational, plenty of ammunition, and the main fusion reactor is stable, she replied. The problem is targeting. With 40-plus targets, we can't possibly engage them all. Parker's voice crackled over the intercom from the engineering deck. Captain, I've been thinking about our power distribution problems. What if we deliberately overload our systems? Not to destroy ourselves, but to create a massive electromagnetic pulse that might disrupt their perfect networks. The idea was insane and desperate, exactly the kind of plan that might work against an enemy that had never faced desperate opponents. Morrison looked around at his crew, seeing determination mixed with fear in their faces. Right? Could it work? He asked. Theoretically, yes. If we overload our fusion reactors while simultaneously firing every weapon system we have, the energy release would be tremendous. Their ship's sensors and power networks might not be able to handle that kind of interference. Morrison made his decision. Do it. Rodriguez, target their flagship. If we're going down, we're taking their command ship with us. The Imperial attack began with devastating precision. 43 warships opened fire simultaneously, their energy weapons designed to reduce the human vessel to its component atoms. The combined firepower was enough to crack a moon, more than sufficient to eliminate a single damaged ship. But Captain Morrison had one advantage that Admiral Zephyr couldn't understand. He had nothing left to lose. While the Imperial commander was worried about maintaining his reputation and preserving his fleet, Morrison was focused entirely on inflicting maximum damage before the inevitable end. Lieutenant Bobby Chun transmitted a final message to Earth, broadcasting on all frequencies, and every communications method the Defiant carried. The transmission included complete tactical data about Imperial technology, detailed analysis of their weaknesses, and a warning that humanity faced an enemy unlike anything they had ever imagined. Message away, Captain, Chun reported. If we don't make it home, at least Earth will know what's coming. Parker's voice echoed from the engineering deck, where he was manually overriding every safety system the ship possessed. Fusion reactors at 120%. We've got maybe 2 minutes before containment fails. The Imperial energy barrage struck the Defiant with tremendous force, but Morrison had timed his response perfectly. As the enemy weapons tore through his ship's hull, every remaining railgun fired simultaneously while the fusion reactors began their controlled overload. The electromagnetic pulse that resulted was unlike anything in Imperial experience. The Defiant's death scream was a wave of raw energy that swept through space, disrupting the perfect harmony of Imperial technology. Ships that had operated flawlessly for centuries suddenly found their systems failing in cascading waves of malfunction. Admiral. Zephyr watched in horror as his flagship's main display flickered and died. Emergency lighting activated throughout the bridge as primary power systems shut down to prevent overload. Around him, crew members struggled with manual controls they hadn't used in decades. "Report," Zephyr demanded, his voice cutting through. "The chaos. Multiple system failures across the fleet," came the reply from a technician working frantically at a backup console. "The electromagnetic pulse from the human vessel has disrupted our power distribution networks. We're switching to emergency protocols, but many ships have lost primary propulsion and weapons." The Eternal Dominion, pride of the Imperial fleet, drifted powerless through space as its crew struggled to restore basic functionality. Around it, dozens of other Imperial vessels faced similar problems, their perfect technology betrayed by its own complexity. Sub-Admiral Krex stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Where the human ship had been, only expanding debris remained, but its final act had crippled the most powerful fleet in Imperial history. "How is this possible?" he whispered. They were primitives fighting with scrap metal and desperation. In the expanding cloud of wreckage that had once been the UESIS, emergency transponders activated automatically, broadcasting distress signals on frequencies the Empire didn't monitor. Hidden within the debris, armored data cores protected. A complete records of the battle, waiting for recovery teams that might never come. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in 3,000 years, an Imperial fleet had been defeated, not by superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but by an enemy that refused to accept the rules of engagement the Empire had always taken for granted. Admiral. Zephyr sat in his darkened command throne, contemplating the implications of what had just occurred. The human vessel was destroyed, but its crew had accomplished something no enemy had managed in millennia. They had proven that the Empire could be hurt. Across the galaxy, subject species monitored Imperial communications, and many noted the unusual silence from the Kepler system. Word would spread, as word always did, and with it would come questions about Imperial invincibility that hadn't been asked for 3,000 years. The age of unquestioned Imperial dominance had ended. With the death of a single human ship, and neither side fully understood what would come next. The aftermath of the battle left both sides struggling to comprehend what had happened. Admiral Zephyr sat in the emergency-lit bridge of his flagship, watching repair crews work frantically to restore basic systems. The Eternal Dominion, which had never suffered so much as a scratch in 3,000 years of service, now drifted through space like a wounded giant. Chief Technician Vortex approached the command throne with a data pad containing preliminary damage reports. His 6 arms moved nervously as he delivered news that would have been unthinkable just hours before. "Admiral, 17 ships in the fleet have lost primary propulsion. 23 have weapon systems offline. The electromagnetic pulse from the human vessel created cascading failures throughout our power distribution networks." The words hung in the air like an accusation. A single primitive ship had accomplished what entire star systems had failed to achieve in 3 millennia of Imperial expansion. The implications were staggering, not just tactically but politically. Sub-Admiral Krex moved carefully through the darkened bridge, his reptilian features showing strain that had never been there before. "Admiral, we need to discuss containment protocols. If word of this defeat spreads throughout the Empire, it could destabilize our authority over hundreds of worlds." Zephyr understood the gravity of their situation. Imperial rule was built on the absolute certainty of military supremacy. Every subject species accepted their place in the Empire because resistance was futile. If that perception changed, if species across the galaxy learned that humans had fought the Imperial fleet to a standstill, the consequences would be catastrophic. In the debris field where the Defiant had made its final stand, Automated recovery systems worked quietly to preserve what remained of the human vessel. The ship's armored data cores had survived the destruction, their contents protected by layers of redundant shielding that the Enthea Empire had dismissed as primitive, overcomplicated engineering. Dr. Helen Wright had designed those data cores with typical human paranoia, assuming that everything that could go wrong would go wrong at the worst possible moment. The cores contained complete tactical analyses of Imperial technology, detailed recordings of the battle, and most importantly, specifications for the weapons and tactics that had proven effective against supposedly superior Imperial forces. On Earth, the first fragments of the Defiant's final transmission were being analyzed by teams of scientists and military experts. General Patricia Hayes stood in the Situation Room beneath the Pentagon, studying displays that showed humanity's first glimpse of galactic civilization. The data was incomplete and fragmentary, but the message was clear. Earth faced an enemy, with technology centuries beyond their own capabilities. "How long do we have?" Hayes asked the assembled experts. Dr. Marcus Webb, Earth's leading expert on theoretical physics, looked up from his analysis of the Imperial energy signatures. Based on the data from the Defiant, their ships are capable of traveling between star systems in days rather than months. If they decide Earth is a threat, they could be here within weeks. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had achieved interstellar travel, but their technology was primitive compared to what the Empire possessed. The only advantage they had was the knowledge that Captain Morrison and his crew had died to provide. Back in the Kepler system, Admiral Zephyr faced a decision that would reshape his understanding of warfare itself. The standard Imperial response to resistance was overwhelming force, followed by complete subjugation. But the humans were already dead, their ship destroyed, their threat eliminated. What remained was the knowledge of what they had accomplished and the questions that knowledge would raise. "Sir," Communications Officer Vex reported from his station, "we're receiving priority transmissions from Imperial Command. They're demanding a full report on the delay in sector pacification." Zephyr stared at the communication panel, knowing that his next words would either preserve the Empire's reputation or shatter it completely. How could he explain that a single primitive vessel had crippled the most advanced fleet in galactic history? How could he make his superiors understand that everything they thought they knew about warfare had been proven wrong by a crew of determined humans? Chief Technician Vortex continued his damage assessment, moving from ship to ship in the crippled fleet. What he found challenged every assumption Imperial science had made about technology and warfare. The human railgun slugs hadn't just caused physical damage. They had revealed fundamental flaws in Imperial design philosophy. The damage patterns are unlike anything in our databases, Vortex reported to his technical staff. These kinetic weapons struck our shields at precisely the frequencies our energy barriers were not designed to deflect. It's as if the humans understood our technology better than we do. The truth was both simpler and more complex than Vortex realized. Dr. Wright had spent her final hours analyzing captured Imperial technology, not to copy it, but to understand its limitations. Her insights had revealed that the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness, their absolute faith in technological perfection. Imperial ships were designed to fight other Imperial ships, using weapons and tactics that had remained unchanged for centuries. When faced with an enemy that didn't follow established patterns, their perfect systems became brittle and vulnerable. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Sub-Admiral Krex received reports from across the galaxy that confirmed his worst fears. Imperial subject species were monitoring fleet communications, and while the official channels remained silent about the battle, unofficial networks were buzzing with rumors of human resistance. The Vrex Confederation conquered 2 centuries ago had increased security patrols around their industrial worlds. The Silicon Collective was requesting additional garrison forces to maintain order. Most disturbing of all, the hegemony of free traders was asking pointed questions about Imperial military capabilities and deployment schedules. "Admiral," Krex said quietly, "we may have eliminated the immediate threat, but we've created a much larger problem. The galaxy is watching us, and they're seeing weakness where they once saw only strength." Admiral Zephyr finally understood the true scope of the disaster they faced. The loss of ships and personnel was significant but manageable. The loss of Imperial invincibility was catastrophic beyond measure. He activated his personal communication system and opened a direct channel to Imperial Command. The conversation that followed would determine not just his own fate, but the future of the Empire itself. "Imperial Command, this is Admiral Zephyr, reporting from the Kepler system. I need to speak with the High Council immediately. We have encountered a new form of warfare that requires fundamental changes to our military doctrine." The response came back within minutes, carrying the authority of 3,000 years of unquestioned rule. "Admiral Zephyr, explain your situation. The High Council is prepared to listen." Zephyr took a deep breath and began the most difficult report of his career. The human species represents a paradigm shift in galactic warfare. Their technology appears primitive, but their tactical thinking is unlike anything we have encountered. They fight not to win according to established rules, but to cause maximum damage regardless of cost to themselves. He paused, knowing that his next words would sound like the ravings of a defeated commander. "They turned their own destruction into a weapon against us. A single human vessel crippled 43 Imperial warships through tactics we never anticipated and technology we dismissed as inferior." The silence from Imperial Command stretched for long minutes before the response came. "Admiral, you are ordered to return to Imperial Center immediately for debriefing. The High Council will determine appropriate action based on your full report." As the communication ended, Zephyr realized that his career was likely over, but that was the least of his concerns. The Empire faced something it had never encountered before, an enemy that could think beyond the established patterns of galactic warfare. In the debris field of the Kepler system, automated beacons continued broadcasting distress signals that no one was monitoring. Hidden within those signals were compressed data files containing humanity's first tactical analysis of Imperial technology, waiting for recovery teams that might arrive too late or not at all. The galaxy had changed, and neither the Empire nor humanity fully understood what would come next. The age of unquestioned Imperial dominance was ending, replaced by something new and unpredictable that both sides would struggle to comprehend. 3 months after the battle in the Kepler system, the effects rippled across the galaxy like waves from a stone thrown into still water. On Earth, massive construction projects had transformed the orbital shipyards from research facilities into military production centers. General Patricia Hayes stood in the command center, overlooking the construction of humanity's first true battle fleet, watching as ships that incorporated both human engineering and captured Imperial technology took shape. The data cores from the Defiant had been recovered by a follow-up mission, their contents providing Earth scientists with invaluable intelligence about Imperial capabilities and weaknesses. Dr. Marcus Webb led the team analyzing Imperial technology, working around the clock to understand systems that operated on principles decades ahead of human science. "The Empire's ships are masterpieces of engineering," Webb explained to Hayes during their morning briefing, "but they're also incredibly vulnerable to disruption. Their power distribution networks are so perfectly integrated that damaging one component can bring down entire systems." Hayes nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed Earth's new fleet taking shape. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from the Defiant's final battle, with redundant systems, compartmentalized design, and weapons specifically chosen to exploit Imperial weaknesses. How many ships will be ready for the first deployment? Hayes asked. 12 capital ships, 36 cruisers, and over 100 smaller vessels, replied Admiral Jake Morrison, recently promoted and given command of the new fleet. The title still felt strange to him, earned through the sacrifice of his crew and the destruction of his ship. Morrison had spent weeks debriefing with Earth's military leaders, sharing every detail of the encounter with Imperial forces. His insights had shaped the design of the new fleet, ensuring that human ships would never again face the Empire at such a technological disadvantage. Across the galaxy, the Empire struggled with the aftermath of their first military defeat in 3,000 years. Admiral Zephyr had been recalled to Imperial Center, where the High Council debated responses to a situation they had never faced before. The official reports described the Kepler incident as a minor delay in expansion, but privately, Imperial leadership understood they faced a crisis that threatened the foundation of their civilization. Sub-Admiral Krex now commanded the rebuilt Kepler fleet, tasked with developing new tactics to counter human warfare. The ships under his command had been upgraded with redundant systems and improved armor, but he knew that technological solutions alone would not solve their problem. The humans fight like nothing we have encountered before, Krex explained to his tactical staff during a strategy session. They do not seek victory through superior technology or overwhelming force. They seek to inflict maximum damage while accepting total destruction as an acceptable outcome. The concept was alien to Imperial thinking, where warfare was a precise art focused on achieving objectives with minimal losses. Human tactics appeared suicidal by Imperial standards, but their effectiveness could not be denied. Chief Technician Vortex had spent months analyzing the wreckage from the battle, studying human technology with growing respect and unease. His reports to Imperial Command painted a picture of an enemy that approached engineering from a completely different philosophy. Human technology appears crude because it is designed for worst-case scenarios, Vortex reported. Every system has manual backups. Every component can be repaired with basic tools, and every weapon is optimized for maximum effect with minimum resources. The implications were staggering for an empire that had built its supremacy on technological perfection. Human ships might look primitive, but they were designed by a species that had learned to survive against impossible odds. On distant worlds throughout the Empire, subject species monitored the situation with growing interest. The Vrex Confederation had begun subtle military buildup, claiming the need for increased security against pirates and raiders. The Silicon Collective was developing new communications networks that bypassed Imperial monitoring systems. Most significantly, the hegemony of free traders was establishing trade relationships that did not include Imperial oversight. The cracks in Imperial authority were small but growing, fueled by the knowledge that the Empire could be challenged successfully. Word of the human resistance had spread through unofficial channels, conspiring hope where none had existed for centuries. In the ruins of the Kepler system, automated recovery drones continued their work, salvaging what remained of both human and Imperial vessels. The data they collected would eventually make its way to both sides, providing intelligence that would shape the next phase of the conflict. Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, the flagship of humanity's new battle fleet. Ship was larger and more heavily armed than the Defiant, but it retained the practical design philosophy that had kept his previous crew fighting against impossible odds. "Admiral, we're receiving priority communications from Earth Command," reported Commander Lisa Rodriguez, who had accepted Morrison's offer to serve as his tactical officer on the new ship. Hayes appeared on the main screen, her expression grim, but determined. "Admiral Morrison, our intelligence networks report massive Imperial fleet movements throughout their territory. They're consolidating forces for what appears to be a major offensive operation. Morrison studied the tactical data flowing across his displays. The Empire was preparing for war on a scale not seen in millennia, mobilizing fleets from across their territory for a decisive strike against humanity. Estimated time until they reach Earth? Morrison asked. 6 weeks, possibly less if they push their ships beyond normal operational limits, Hayes replied. The question is whether our new fleet will be ready in time. Morrison looked around his bridge, seeing faces both familiar and new. Many of his original crew had died with the Defiant, but their sacrifice had provided humanity with the knowledge needed to fight back. The new crew members were volunteers from across Earth's military forces, united by the understanding that they faced an enemy unlike anything humanity had encountered before. "We'll be ready," Morrison said with quiet confidence. The Empire thinks they're facing the same primitive humans who destroyed their perfect fleet with a single crippled ship. They have no idea what we've learned from their technology and our own mistakes. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker's voice echoed from the engineering deck, where he supervised the installation of weapon systems that combined human practicality with Imperial power sources. "Admiral, all systems are showing green. We're ready to show the Empire what happens when humans have time to prepare." Dr. Helen Wright, now serving as Morrison's science advisor, smiled as she reviewed the tactical capabilities of their new fleet. The Empire's strength has always been their technological superiority and their enemy's acceptance of defeat. We're about to show them what happens when they face an enemy that refuses to lose. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of the galaxy. On one side stood the Galactic Empire, 3,000 years of unchallenged dominance backed by technology that seemed like magic to younger species. On the other side stood humanity, a species that had learned to turn every disadvantage into a weapon and every defeat into a lesson. The Empire expected to face primitives, armed with crude weapons and desperate courage. Instead, they would encounter something far more dangerous: humans who had studied their enemy, learned from their mistakes, and refused to accept that superior technology guaranteed victory. The age of Imperial dominance was ending, and the age of human determination was about to begin. Neither side fully understood what would emerge from the coming conflict, but both knew that the galaxy would never be the same again.